Free agency ain't dead, and the draft is just 5 weeks away. You've got questions, and we've got answers. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon now to get started. What's up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur from horseshoehuddle.com. And today we're answering some of your questions that we called out for recently surrounding the Colts, their draft approach, as well as what is going on in free agency. So let's not delay. Let's get to it. First one is up from @JustinDraper50. Are there any free agent running backs that would be interesting adds, lower cost ones, obviously? So I didn't think running back would be a huge priority for the Colts because we saw in the second half of the season when Jonathan Taylor was really back, he was the bell cow. Zach Moss's role kind of diminished. But we would later learn that, Zach Moss was a little bit of a priority for the Colts at the right price. But he went to the Bengals where the money was probably a little better. And it looks like he's going to get the starting job, going to be splitting time with Chase Brown, but still a bigger role and probably a little more money than he would have got with the Colts. We also found that the Colts were in on A.J. Dillon before he went back to the Packers. So that was pretty interesting. It just goes to show you that it was a priority for the Colts to have someone, whether as insurance behind Taylor or as a 1-2 punch with Taylor. But still, it doesn't seem like they're totally sold on their mix of Trey Sermon, Tyler Goodson, and Evan Hull. I wouldn't be shocked if they added one more running back. At this point, for the price, it may just come in the draft because that's going to be dirt cheap. You can get a running back on day 3. It's not a particularly great running back draft, but I think the Colts are kind of finding this as a challenge. Like, we'll unearth the gems on this one. But just for the sake of answering your questions, there are a few guys I might be interested in. Ezekiel Elliott at this point in his career is not going to be expensive, and he could still provide you with a similar role to what Zach Moss did. You're getting a tough in-between-the-tackles runner with a nose for the end zone. Zeke has always been able to catch the ball. At his best, he was one of the best pass-protecting running backs in the league. So if you just take the name off of that and the stigma of him being a Cowboys running back and expensive and over the hill, for the role you're actually signing him for, I really wouldn't hate it. You're also looking at Cam Akers. He's still 24, I think. Spent time with the Rams and the Vikings. He's still got a little juice left to him. You don't need him to be a star, but if you're looking for a complimentary piece alongside Jonathan Taylor, you could certainly do much worse. And then someone who's got familiarity with Shane Steichen is Boston Scott, formerly of the Eagles. He's always been a nice little member of a platoon-style approach in the running back room. So those are 3 guys I would find somewhat interesting. Next question from @MMaringer5. We know that Chris Ballard has been pretty predictable when going through free agency. Now that we at least have the same starting quarterback in back-to-back years, does he start to go for it a little more? I know it won't be crazy spending, but maybe one bigger move than normal. So this question came in before the whole free agency rush really got underway. So at this point, I think it's easier for us to point more towards, no, there's probably not going to be some big, huge move. Obviously, the one that everyone is waiting on is the validity of whatever this L'Jarius Sneed potential trade is. There's been reporting that the parameters of the trade have been agreed upon, but they're just waiting on figuring out what the compensation would be because it would have to be a sign and trade situation. Sneed's not going anywhere without a new contract. There's also been reports that there won't be a trade at all, probably. So who knows? The Colts do have some work to do in terms of that, though. There's some money they would have to probably move around it to look into that. Right now, I think they've got just over a little bit left to sign their draft class. So they could sign their draft class and not much else at this point. So I think there's some stuff they're going to have to figure out financially if they're going to do anything big. I really don't want to totally rule it out. I think they're interested in impact players, but I don't think they want to break the bank for them. And as we've seen, they're really not going to give outside guys more than like 1 or 2 year deals. So keep an eye on it. I don't think free agency is dead for them. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, I do still think we see a couple outside guys come in, but we're going to have to see guys like Braden Smith, DeForest Buckner, Quentin Nelson. These are guys with big contracts that could have some things restructured to be turned into guaranteed money and take it off of the salary cap, create some more space. So we'll see. I really don't want to put a fork in them and say that they're totally done. I know a lot of people are kind of upset at this point. But the Colts have, in my memory, they have brought back a lot of their own at an unprecedented rate. They've brought back dang near all of their free agents. You're kind of just waiting on Julian Blackmon at this point. Last question, which is going to piggyback off of what I just said. Justin Simmons or no? And that one is from @JustinDraper50. I don't think the Colts want to spend that much at the safety position. Do I think they would be interested in Justin Simmons? Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. That is a free safety ball hockey guy that could take the ball away. He's been among the best in the league since he came in. And the Broncos certainly did not want to have to let him go, but he just had a pretty big price tag at that position. But still, if the Colts are going to spend decent money, I just don't think it's going to be at the safety position. I think we're probably looking at someone along the lines of Julian Blackmon, obviously, or like a Tracy Walker, Mike Edwards, Terrell Edmonds level signing, guys who are not going to cost you much monetarily, maybe within $5 million a year, probably nothing crazy. Again, if you've been following along here with Zach and I, we think they've got to add someone in the secondary at safety and corner. Again, the money's tough to figure out at this point. You've invested a lot in your own, but you still have some holes there. You're either going to make it to where you got to move things around and create space to bring guys in, or you're just going to have to use draft picks, and those guys are going to have to play early. Because the guys you have currently on the roster in those spots are not irreplaceable guys. Like, they need competition. So some real interesting stuff still in free agency, I think. Again, I've still got my finger on the pulse of it, thinking something could happen anytime. That's not to say something is coming down the pipe, but that's just never been the case with the Colts. They've always at least brought in a couple more names, especially at this part of free agency when you're like a week to a week, 3 weeks out. Like, they always make these small, not big splash moves, but throwing a pebble in the water, the ripple effect moves. So it may be not sexy, but I'm not going to say that they're done making moves in free agency so far. So coming up next, we're going to shift our attention more towards the draft. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and many more things that I know nothing about. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And as you guys know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars. Tonight, appointment television, because March 20th, again, tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, check us out for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Again, tonight, March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, so let's get to the draft now. I've been diving a lot more into the draft. I was just out at Toledo for Quinyon Mitchell's pro day. He didn't work out, but he did speak. I'll be at Notre Dame on Thursday. I've got Western Kentucky coming up the week after. And then hopefully if Cooper DeJean's individual workout isn't private, I'm hoping to get out there as well. So really, really starting to dig further into draft stuff right now, especially now that free agency is kind of quieted down a bit. So at B Beltix, what are your wide receiver rankings and how do they fit the system? So far, I don't have anything earth shattering. I think the top three is pretty similar for everybody. It's just in what order. I do have Marvin Harrison Jr. at the top. I've seen him perform in person. Today is actually Ohio State's pro day, and he infamously is not working out at it after not doing anything at the combine. Let me tell you, his pro day was last year at CJ Stroud's pro day. It was Stroud's pro day, and he made a lot of noise, but the star of the show was Marvin Harrison. No one in the NFL needs to see anything else from Marvin. They don't want to see anything else from Marvin. Their rankings are what they are, but he is a guy who has nothing left to do. That's a guy who his grade was finalized for most teams, I'm sure, before Ohio State's season even ended. So he does not have to do anything. I've got Rome Odunze next. I think he is arguably the most complete receiver. He probably has the highest marks across the entire body of work that a receiver can have. Obviously, I think Harrison has the highest upside and could be truly dominant. But I think Rome Odunze just really, as a whole, is probably the most complete receiver. Malik Neighbors, obviously a very explosive player. A lot of people have them as their top guy, and I could see why. Brian Thomas Jr., I love the potential of him, and I'm kind of banking on him becoming more of a route runner. If you think of he has similar skill sets to Alec Pierce as a downfield threat, but he's actually able to do things with the ball in his hand too. So he's explosive with the ball in his hand and downfield. I really like that. And then Keon Coleman. Once someone told me that, because you look at a big guy who is more athletic and explosive on tape than he is in the testing, and someone compared him to Brandon Marshall, and it just blipped a light bulb for me. I was like, yes, okay, that makes a lot of sense. That is a real example of what a guy with that skill set and frame and physical attributes can be. Of course, the NFL is all about athleticism and freak athletes right now, but sometimes the bigger guys who just don't test super well, they're gonna, their tape is gonna be better. So I will say my receiver rankings are definitely gonna change the more I watch guys. I've got more tape to watch on more guys. I've got some balancing to do. I've got some not background information, but just non-tape related stuff to throw in there. My rankings are definitely gonna change, but that's kind of how I've got it right now. Next up, at Joey Vanderpool. Setting aside the possibility of Brock Bowers or a top shelf cornerback dropping to 15, I keep coming back to Brian Thomas Jr. or Adonai Mitchell. They test very similarly. Which would you prefer if that was the pick at 15? Just AD Mitchell is right after that group of five for me. He may wind up in my top five. So Brian Thomas Jr., obviously. Very explosive player, can stretch the defense, can do a lot with the ball in his hands. I really, really like what he can do. I think he'd be the second or third receiver in a lot of drafts if this wasn't such a good receiver draft at the top. AD Mitchell does a lot of things that remind me of maybe if Brian Thomas Jr., let's say AD Mitchell kind of does some things that remind me stylistically of CeeDee Lamb. I could see that as a high-end comp, if he reaches his potential. And obviously CeeDee Lamb has gone on to become a truly big star at receiver. So that's, the Colts almost cannot go wrong at receiver in this draft as long as they actually take one in the first couple of rounds. Next up, at Daniel Darling 2307, where do you guys predict Cade Stover will go? He's not Brock Bowers, but he is the best blocking tight end and has very good hands and footwork. I think a blocking tight end is needed. So Stover, you're probably looking at like rounds 4 to 5 in this one. This isn't a great tight end draft either. To me, there is a bit of a drop off after Bowers and Jatavian Sanders. I think both of them are studs, and they both would be worth early picks, obviously. But after that, I'm down to wait until later on for just about any of these other tight ends. As far as the NFL goes, I don't think the NFL necessarily will think Stover is the best blocking tight end. I could see them looking more at AJ Barner or Tip Ryman, Barner from Michigan, Ryman from Illinois. Stover's still a fine blocker, a fine overall tight end, but I think he's probably going to be more of a 4th or 5th round guy. Next up, at GS_Duckpin. Do you think there's any chance that Chris Ballard can make a splash play in the draft, like trading with the Chargers and selecting Malik Neighbors? That would definitely make the offense more explosive. I love you trying to make it chaotic and crazy. I really enjoy that. It's kind of like Daniel Jeremiah in his recent mock draft, introduce some more trades and things. I do think there's some teams in the top 10-ish that would be willing to go down. Arizona makes sense. The Chargers make sense. Even the Bears with that next pick, they get Caleb Williams first, and then maybe they want to recoup some more picks after like number 9 and just keep building around him. So if the Colts really wanted to move up, they probably could. I don't think they will, though, because they re-signed pretty much all their free agents. They've added very little impact players. Like they added Joe Flacco, who you hope to never see him because you want Anthony Richardson out there 100% of the time. They added Raekwon Davis, who you'll see occasionally, but he's not a starter. So to me, optically, this looks like they're going to be putting a lot on the draft class. So with that being said, I don't think they want to give up a lot of picks later on in the draft or even future picks. I think they'll probably want to stick and make these picks in the first 3 rounds because I think they're going to be able to get some really good players. Now, what positions those are, who knows? You could get a Bowers or Jatavian Sanders in the first 2 rounds. Receiver, there's a million receivers they can get in the first couple rounds. Cornerback, obviously, whether it's Terrion Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, I wouldn't move up. I would maybe even move back a little bit and add an extra 3rd or a 4th or something like that. If they can go from like 15 to 20 and add like a late 3rd or early 4th round pick or something, I think that would be absolutely huge for them. So I don't think they would move up. It makes it's fun. I'm not going to deny it. That sounds fun. I just don't see it happening though. Next up, at Richardson season, how would Chris Ballard realistically view Xavier Worthy? There's size concerns, of course, but his speed is historic. Of course, that's a guy who you're looking at tiny size. He's, less than, he's your 5'9", 170-pound style receiver, but with incredible speed. Now, I don't want to say that Chris Ballard just totally looks down on this all the time. When he's with the Chiefs, they did take Tyreek Hill in the middle rounds, and not every little receiver with speed is Tyreek Hill, of course, but I do think Xavier Worthy is going to be a better pro player than he was in college. I just think there's more to unlock depending on which scheme and which quarterback he goes to. I think you give Worthy to a quarterback like Anthony Richardson and a coach like Shane Steichen. I think that could be super explosive. I do think Chris Ballard is more. He's shown in the past that he's willing to listen to his coaches about the types of players they like. I mean, how many quarterbacks did he get specifically for Frank Reich? And then Frank Reich loved Paris Campbell. Obviously, Josh Downs last year. Like Chris Ballard is willing to. He has types, but he's willing to give coaches specific players they want. If they really love Worthy and they want to get him like in the 2nd round or like trade up in the 2nd round to go get him or something, that could certainly be a possibility. He's obviously not a Bill Ballard type, but I think he would fits what they would want to do. I mean, you're not getting a lot of production out of Alec Pierce as your more flanker receiver, your Z receiver. So shoot, why not add a guy like Worthy to add something to it and be a return specialist as well as a rookie until he's more ready for more of a broadened role in that second year. And this last draft related one, again from Richardson's season, is there a position that you think people might be surprised that the Colts might add? We're going to say that's round one. So the only one that I think they really would potentially go after that would be surprising, because I want to make it realistic, is defensive tackle. You look at like Byron Murphy, makes a lot of sense. Super athletic interior guy. They've shown they want to have some juice in their interior. They added Raekwon Davis, Taven Bryan. So a guy like Murphy, I think he fits their measurables in athletics. None of these guys. Darius Robinson is about the only one that checks all the boxes for them in terms of interior players. Byron Murphy and Johnny Newton, they've got their, you'd be lacking on, I think length is really their issue. But I could really see it, especially if they traded down. Now I'm cheating because this is necessarily for 15. But I would not be shocked if like Byron Murphy or Johnny Newton was the pick if their first pick was like in the 20s. Now, I don't think they would do it at 15. I think Darius Robinson is a very, very Colts type player as well. Again, these are only if they trade down and their first pick is like in the mid to late 20s. I think they make sense. I wouldn't love it, but I could see the Colts wanting to do it. So coming up next, we're going to finish up the show by talking about just kind of generally the state of the Colts right now. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, so let's talk more specifically about, I guess, the current Colts here. This first one is from @WizOpIndy. What do you see as the team's timeline? We have the quarterback, but this is essentially his rookie year. I think it's too early to go all in with first-tier free agents and much too early to give up draft picks for veterans. So again, this is another question that came in before the free agency rush really hit. And I think you were seeing the forest through the trees here, WizOpIndy. So the Colts obviously have not gone all in with like first-tier free agents or made a big trade. They're not giving up early picks for veterans. However, the Colts had to take a long look in the mirror last year and realize they were not as close as they thought they had been to being late season competitors into the postseason like they thought they had been the previous few years. They couldn't just throw a veteran quarterback into this and expect to get to the AFC Championship. So they knew they were kind of a retooling, rebuilding team. I don't want to say totally rebuilding, but it was closer to it than it wasn't. But so I don't think they're going all in, because we haven't seen them make all these short-term win-now moves like outside free agents, guys who don't need development. They've invested almost solely in their own players. But adding Joe Flacco tells me, especially guys like 39, that if something happens to Anthony Richardson again, they know that they're capable of making the playoffs, because Gardner Minshew almost took them there. So you get the reigning comeback player of the year to get him over the hump into the playoffs and maybe win a game or two. Like, all you need to do is get into the playoffs to potentially get to the Super Bowl. All you need is that chance. So I think the Colts think their window is opening. I think with Anthony Richardson, they think the sky is probably the limit. You get the explosive offense coached by a guy like Shane Steichen, who helped keep the ship afloat throughout a lot of injuries and without their quarterback last year. I don't think the Colts timeline is all that far off. They could have very well been in the playoffs last year. Even if it was like a wild card exit, they were right there on the door. They just needed to win the final game and they would have got in. So let's call them a quasi playoff team. They hopefully take a jump having this explosive young quarterback come in. I mean, I'm not saying they're Super Bowl contenders, but I think there's a very, very good chance they make the playoffs this year. I don't think that's far-fetched. again, they should have been in the playoffs this last year. So I think their timeline is coming pretty soon. If this offseason, I guess, was just about securing things around Anthony Richardson, maybe over the next calendar year or so, we see them start to add more firepower to get them over the hump. They've already talked about wanting more, so I'm guessing they're just going to have to do it through the draft, but we'll see. The moves they make will be very telling. Next question, at Matthias Dahl 1993. Do you think the Colts will restructure contracts for guys like Braden Smith, Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, and re-sign DeForest Buckner to an extension to create more cap room so that they can fill the needs they have in the secondary and free agency? So I kind of mentioned this at the top of the show. I think that you're going to have to. If you're making some move, some somewhat expensive move like a Justin Simmons, L'Jarius Sneed, this or that, you're going to have to create cap space somewhere. So those are some of the first areas I would look. And some people see restructuring as taking a pay cut, and it's really almost the exact opposite. You're guaranteeing money and taking it off of the books for salary cap space. So instead of kicking money down the road, you're guaranteeing it and giving it to guys right now, or you're not making them wait for it. You're taking that money off the books for future planning. So those are guys you certainly could do that with. I think if they're going to try and do something, that's one of the first places they've got to look. Next, at Justin Draper 50, how do you think the draft picks from last year who were out due to injury play into free agency in the draft? So I just kind of generally, you're obviously looking at Anthony Richardson, Evan Hull, Daniel Scott, Jake Witt, and Titus Leo. Now, Scott, Witt, and Leo are just obviously footnotes. I think Richardson, obviously, you plan on him being back, and you would have thought they had more weapons around him. They haven't done that yet. But something I'll applaud them for is they have re-secured their entire offensive line from last year, a line that was really good. They ranked 10th in rushing despite Zach Moss having injuries at times, Jonathan Taylor having 2 different stints where he was out. They were middle of the road in sacks given up, but they also had a quarterback that kind of created his own pressure. And Anthony Richardson, one of his strengths has always been avoiding sacks. So they've brought back every member of last year's offensive line. So I think that's huge for Richardson. They haven't given him more weapons yet, but they have definitely helped make sure that he is protected. Evan Hall, I think he's not a guy that's got like a guaranteed spot or anything, but I think he's going to have every opportunity in the world to compete for that RB2 spot with Sermon and Goodson until we see otherwise, like they draft someone within the first 4 rounds or something, or if they sign kind of like a mid-level free agent running back, some of the guys I mentioned near the top of the show. Daniel Scott, he is someone who may factor into their plans at safety. Maybe. I probably wouldn't do it at this point coming off that injury, but it would certainly explain why they haven't done much there. Special teams is probably going to be where his bread is buttered, but anytime I've asked about him, whether it was Brian Mason or Chris Ballard, they have mentioned his ability to play safety as well. So we'll see. Jake Witt and Titus Leo. Titus Leo is kind of a little sleeper. Was on IR and didn't get to really make the roster and prove himself as an edge rusher last offseason, but we'll see. It could be someone that does a little something in camp. Jake Witt, an athletic former tight end, offensive tackle convert. You're just kind of seeing what you've got there. I think he had a hip injury that ended his season before it could start. But it was good that they at least have him in the system throughout the year. And again, see what he can do in training camp. Last one from at Joey Mar 0917. Why does everyone count out Kylan Granson? He is an athlete of a tight end and has gotten better every year in the league. With him and a healthy Jelani Woods, I don't think that the Colts should even consider Brock Bowers if he's there at 15. What do you think? Why don't people respect Granson? That's a very good question. Like I've always been pretty pro Kylan Granson and think that he should have a bigger role in the offense. But we can't ignore the fact yet that the Colts have not given him a bigger role in the offense, and that's kind of got to speak for something. I do think they like him, but I don't think he's someone who's irreplaceable. Brock Bowers or again Jatavian Sanders in the second round, I think is kind of a souped up version of Kylan Granson, a more athletic version, at least on tape. I'd be fine with Granson still being the guy. I like the idea of Jelani Woods coming back and being able to show something with Kylan Granson and Will Mallory kind of battling it out to be another complimentary tight end, because they do have talent in that room. And if they elect to go with an explosive receiver as opposed to Sanders or Bowers in the first couple rounds, I'm cool with that. I don't think they have to add a big contributor at each position. I would just do it at least one of them. And so if they go into next year with Granson, Mallory, and Woods being the guys at tight end, I'm cool with it. I think Granson has a special skill set that not a lot of tight ends have. Throughout his time in the league, he's been one of the better separators when it comes to running his routes among tight ends. So, I mean, you give him his quarterback to work with, and maybe they grow together a little bit, and maybe he could be a little productive. You're right. His productivity has gone up each year. And just because he's not a star doesn't mean he's not a quality player. So I'm with you. I mean, I don't consider him irreplaceable, but I do like him as a player, and I'd be fine with him being part of the group moving forward. So that's it. Thanks for your questions, guys. Again, if you have more questions, send them to us on Twitter at Locked On Colts. And remember, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. And then the bell of the ball here, the Indy Draft Guide. Pre-orders are now open for $8.99 with code DRAFTMAS. That's DRAFTMAS. You get access to an essential piece of reading for Colts fans both before and after the draft, featuring 225 plus in-depth scouting reports, features, and much more. Just click the link in our show notes to pre-order your copy today. And if you don't already, follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also love your ratings and reviews as well. We'll be done with this in like 15 seconds. So right after this, please leave a very nice review if you enjoy the show. Please subscribe if you don't already. And with that, we will see you guys tomorrow.